Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It is the first week in December 2020. The year is almost over, and I'll be honest, the end of the year can't get here quick enough for most of us. Since our last episode, we took off last week for the Thanksgiving holiday. I hope everyone had an all right time, whatever you did, hopefully in a very small, intimate setting with just your closest family. Since then, it's not been great news for the state, for I think all three of us personally in some way or another. I'm joined as always by Bailey Perkins. Hello, Bailey.
Hey, Andy. Hey, listeners.
And Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Man, just everyone in America is kind of dragging through day to day, week to week. Bailey, you posted on social media this week that you lost your grandfather to COVID. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Yeah. He was in the Lawton Veterans Center. So the facility for aging or disabled veterans. And he contracted COVID. And he already had some different complications from falls. And so that contracting COVID just exacerbated the issues he had. And he passed on, what's today, Friday? So I think Tuesday night going into Wednesday. So right before midnight, I got a call from my sister saying that he passed. And so, it's the things we've been talking about and the precautions that we've been discussing, over the past several months have really hit home in a real way.
Yeah. I think I may have mentioned a couple of weeks ago in our last episode that COVID had affected my family. Since then, I believe my mom is in the hospital in the intensive care unit, and this morning they put her on a ventilator. So it's legit been the scariest couple of weeks of my life, I think. So I have nothing else to say about that besides we're all terrified, and Dad and Grandma are at home also terrified, but doing okay. So
Scott,
it's
so weird.
Yeah, right? Like
how months ago we were talking about things more theoretical and like talking about like hearsay stories, to like today having personal stories of how COVID is impacting our personal lives. And so it's doing the very thing that we've been talking about as far as how the second wave can hit communities in a significant way, to where like COVID's not this distant thing that we're reading about on the news. I think a majority of people, and including the listeners on the podcast, can think of a person close to them that has been affected or lost to COVID.
Yeah, I saw a stat today that like a poll currently like 54% or 58% of Americans know someone who's in the hospital with it right now. So not just someone who's had it, but someone who is currently in the hospital. And I will venture a little more personal disclosure to you, our most intimate of followers, that that is one of the things that stands out to me that's so just mind-boggling, is that, every day for the last 2 weeks now, 3 weeks that my mom's been in the hospital, it's constantly on your mind. And she's been able to text with me until today for most of that time. In fact, we thought she was going on a ventilator a week ago, and then we didn't hear anything for several hours, like a day. And then she texted me and said, nope, not on the vent. We've been able to kind of FaceTime, but reading her messages, right? Like she's weak and has had all these machines, and, being in the hospital is tough. And so even the text messages today that we exchanged shortly before they intubated her are just gut wrenching, right? And it occurs to me that while this is very personal to me, I am one of tens of thousands of people throughout the country, right, that are experiencing this with their families today, and that every minute that we talk, an average of 2 Americans die from this. Like, it is nuts. And we can talk about mask mandates and how we should have them, because we should, but it's beyond that, right? Like, it doesn't do any good to wear a mask and then walk into a restaurant full of people. It doesn't do any good to wear a mask in your car or at home and then walk into a church full of people and sing. Like, you can wear a mask walking around Walmart. Great. That's good. You should do that. But when you're doing these other things that totally undercut that, it doesn't do any good.
Because you're hurting loved ones like ours. Like my step grandfather, like, stopped eating.
Yeah.
Because the way that the virus was hitting his body and the different things that he was going through. And so the fact that somebody in this enclosed facility was exposed, and they probably were asymptomatic.
Well, and that's the other thing. My grandma contracted it likely from a home health worker that was at her facility, right, that didn't know it. And it is now spread like wildfire. There's 30 cases from what we've heard as of today, like in this facility, which is terrifying. And Scott, I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off, but I'll cut to you in a second. I literally just got a text from a friend that said he and his two brothers he and his brother and his mom were able to go say goodbye to their dad because he's just they've taken him off life support from COVID. So like, yeah, like this isn't just a theoretical. This is,
it's just
life.
I am so far fortunate in that my family has been okay, but I have, as of today, I found out as I was leaving the office today, I've had 4 patients that I've lost to the coronavirus. I found out one right before I left the office today, a woman that I've seen for several years, whose husband is also in the ICU with COVID and is not doing well. So that may be another one soon. It's awful. And the thing that's just so, God, it's just so, it's like, it's enraging to me is that it did not have to be this way. It didn't have to be this way. Right.
Absolutely.
Like it, now, I love the comparisons to like Taiwan as much as the next guy. The United States is not an island where, you can literally completely control entry and exit. So I don't know that we were ever going to have outcomes like that, but man, it didn't have to be this bad. And like, we made a choice that this is how it was going to be because we haven't, as a society, we haven't had the courage to do the things that are necessary to keep it from being like this. I hear some people like, they talk about like, well, these people that are letting people inside their restaurants. Well, man, like, if I'd gotten a $500,000 business loan and put a bunch of my own money in to open a restaurant in the last 3 years and like wasn't going to get any support from the government to like try and keep my livelihood open during this time. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know what I would do if I was in that situation. If I would just be like, well, I'm going to close up shop and declare bankruptcy and start over. Maybe I would, but I'm not going to promise that would happen. Like, I think,
but if everybody
everyone
else
is
operating around you, why would you close and
exactly.
It doesn't make if the government's not going to set the playing field for everybody. Like
exactly. We've put our businesses in an untenable position. We've put our teachers in an untenable position. Our school boards, our hospitals are, we've like. This is a policy choice that we made several months ago. There was a state legislator, a guy that I like and respect a lot, who was on Twitter talking about a small town in Oklahoma and said they haven't had a single reported case. Why should they have to be under a mask mandate? This is why. To keep this from happening is why. Because you know what? That same town, they have a bunch of freaking cases of coronavirus now. Right. Because somebody brought it, right? Because somebody brought it and that's how it happens. And I just, man, I've been in kind of a dark space for the last week, which is, you guys know from listening, that never happens to me. But and I don't I don't talk about this a lot, like on the podcast or on social media or whatever, because I just don't, but like, I really enjoy the celebration of like the liturgical calendar, the Christian liturgical calendar, the kind of Orthodox calendar, and this is the Advent season, right? the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, and Advent. Excuse me. Advent traditionally, I don't think I have COVID as far as I know, but I'm at home. Advent is a season of waiting. Like the idea is like you're waiting in the darkness for light to come. That's kind of the like long history of Advent, and that feels very appropriate to me right now. Like this idea of like waiting in the darkness for some sort of hope. But I also think that we should be like, as individuals, as our friend groups, maybe our churches, or if or whatever faith tradition, if that's part of your life, or whatever group that you're a part of, that you kind of lean to and interact with and have a close relationship with. I feel like one of the things we should just be like kind of meditating on is, how did we wind up in this spot, right? Like, how did we wind up with a society where there are so many of us that apparently care so little about even the chance of hurting someone else, that we're unwilling to take like a minor convenience? Like, how did we get to this point where we were just, this is like what we're okay with? And I think there's a lot of complex,
I think we put, even at the beginning of the pandemic, this wrong comparison that it's either the economy or the pandemic. The reality is, when we don't control the spread and prevent it, it's costing us more money. We're having to spend more money on hospitals. We're having to spend, because I saw someone tweet that Arkansas will be spending $500,000 that will cover like 10 hospital beds. I mean, we hurt our economy, and we're having to put more resources into this thing, because we're like, it's good for business and good for the economy when we can get this thing under control. And the fact that we pit one against the other has even caused this idea that like now we've worsened both at the same time.
Right. That's exactly what I was going to say. And we, as humans, right, I don't think this is unique to America, but it is certainly highlighted here. But as humans, we are by and large not great at internally weighing risk, like accurately assessing risk and responding.
Terrible. Right.
Like the number of people who believe that they're going to become millionaires or billionaires is like inversely related to the number of people who think they're going to get COVID, right? Maybe not at this point. We all can feel it as community spread, but we have this like belief that things are going to work out and it's going to be okay. And we don't take steps that are appropriately precautionary to prevent things. And then we have to respond. And I think, to bring this back around to the normal content of our podcast, which is about politics and policy and civic engagement, we see this all the time with public policy, right? Like, we are perpetually behind the eight ball trying to respond to something that we knew was going to happen, and we didn't do it. And the one, like, it's not a exception to that, but Governor Stitt's plan to put more money into the rainy day fund a couple of years ago, because we would need it for a rainy day. Like, we needed a larger rainy day fund, and there was all that discussion. And sure enough, like, we did need money. And even at the time, like, he caught a bunch of flack for doing it. And I remember talking on the show of like, I get why he's catching flack for this, but also like, he's right. Like, we are not great about planning for the future. In this instance, there was clearly a pandemic response plan that was thrown out the window early on. We've seen the same thing happen with HIV and other pandemics and public health issues. And so, in fact, the State Impact Oklahoma, Catherine Sweeney, has a good segment. If you subscribe to their podcast, it's like a 5 or 10 minute episode about syphilis and how America had almost eradicated syphilis, and then we like got lax on it, and now it's back and it's raging, and it is it's infecting. It's not. We got lax on it because people thought only gay men got it, or men who have sex with men, and that is not the case, and it was never been just the case. But they stopped investing in syphilis prevention, and now it's a lot of heterosexual women who are getting it and transmitted it to their babies during childbirth. And it's like, you guys, you knew exactly how to prevent this. Like it's a shot. It's real easy. And
It was
here
a
we
few
are.
years ago. There was an outbreak of, I think, was it polio again that we saw some
Yeah.
polio float back,
Uh-huh.
and then mumps come back.
Mhm,
I knew a person, and not my current job, but in a previous job, I knew somebody who sat near me. This was a long time ago. Who had mumps, and it was just like, is this the
Mumps.
twilight? Like these things like are so preventable, and we know what it takes to
Yeah.
eradicate them. And then here we are. To your point, Andy, you're so right that we're not good at assessing risk, but we're also punishing people who want to do the right thing in policy. And so we saw that recently when Governor Stitt removed another person who was in a position that he appointed them to. He removed a person he appointed to the State Board of Education who supported a statewide mask mandate.
Yeah, that's been
He did it again.
kind of
Did it again today.
that's right. So that's kind of been a bombshell thing of news today, right? I think the headline I saw said rather abruptly removed someone from their position there and appointed somebody else, a not mask denier, but anti-masker in his place. And it's like, okay, man, there's a lot of reasons that someone should serve on a statewide education board. Their opinion about public health should not be the leading one, right?
Right.
Particularly if it's contrary to.
I mean, even the freaking governor was photographed on a plane, I think yesterday, in the airport and on a plane wearing a mask covering only his freaking mouth, right? And I guarantee if you asked him, he'd say, well, I've already had COVID, right? Like, it's like, I mean, it's infuriating. It sets a poor example. It's disrespectful to people that are risking their lives trying to take care of these patients. It's disrespectful to people who have lost their loved ones. And it is the Blythe. Is it Blythe or Blith? Blithe? Blythe attitude with which, maybe, but the just kind of laissez-faire, like go along, no big deal attitude that so many of our state leaders have had throughout this is just infuriating.
Yeah.
And it's really scary when we're overtly removing people or selecting people in positions because they will walk in lockstep with the way that we think. It's
right.
Governmental leaders should appoint people to positions who we can trust their expertise and knowledge to make good decisions on behalf of Oklahomans. And I understand that you want to select people who share similar ideological views and similar, foundational beliefs, but there's going to be moments where you may not have all the answers and somebody may be able to weigh in from their knowledge and expertise. And if we're making these decisions by you're going to get a position only if you do the thing I want you to do exactly the way I want you to do it, then are we really leaning into people's knowledge and expertise to be able to govern in a genuine way?
Right. Well, and so let's go back to this, the State Board of Education issue, because there's more to it than just masking, right? Like there's the fact that the previous person. So for some quick history is that the governor appoints members to the State or the State Board of Education. There's also this other board that's been in the news, and that's the statewide virtual charter school board. And I think this guy Bolenbach serves on both, and he's the one that previously the governor had appointed, and then today basically kicked off the board and replaced him with this other person. Now, part of the Melissa something, I forget her last name. I will link to the story in the show notes, though. So the other deal going back is that the person that the governor had appointed to the statewide charter school review board, he replaced them, and it was like before the audit, the person supported the audit, all the stuff we've been talking about, the audit of Epic charter schools. So then the governor removes this person and reappoints a new person that has familial, like financial connection to Epic charter schools. And so now there's like this huge potential conflict of interest. It seems like a conflict of interest. And even if it's not an actuality, it certainly looks like one. And my beef with anything like that is that the appearance of a conflict of interest undermines the public's trust in the government, right? And over the last several years, right, like we've been dealing with this, I mean, for decades, but when you have someone who comes in that says, I'm going to run the government like a business, and that we should drain the swamp and get these bums out, and whatever, all the other talking points, but then replaces them with like friends and family and other folks who are not qualified and may financially benefit from their position only because of that. Like it puts their needs or desires ahead of what's best for the public. And this goes to what Bailey said a minute ago, that ideally what I think most people want is we want leaders and government officials that have the public's best interests at heart, right? Like that's the goal. And situations like this undermine that, and it drives me bananas. Bailey nods in agreement.
Yeah.
I have nothing else to. I'm sorry. I think all of us are. I don't really know how to describe my headspace today. I mean, like I think all of us are feeling this from very different angles. I mean, I'm not to presume how either of you feel, but I would guess that Bailey, you're feeling this like acute loss of a beloved person, and Andy, you're feeling this like fear and tension of like, I don't know what's going to happen, and like I'm feeling the anxiety of the fear of those things in my family, as well as just the like kind of exhaustion and feeling like you're trying to beat back a tidal wave with like a bucket, a water bucket, and like I don't even work in the hospital typically, right? Like and you've got people that are in the hospitals and the emergency rooms and the ICUs. It's just this like, it's just, I think, I don't know, man.
It's like a looming sense of doom.
Like it goes back to like leadership and broader policy decisions, because even like our own little individual actions isn't going to stop things systemically, and we need bold leadership at this time to really stop the spread and reduce the number of families that have to suffer. And so we even are seeing districts that are experimenting, because we talked about this, before the podcast started, experimenting with the idea of doing in school quarantining as a way to help schools go back in person, even though this hasn't been tried any other place in the country, right? And so
they've created a leper colony of children who have COVID, and they're just putting them all in the cafeteria together and let them be there. And like,
how do you even know which students have COVID if some of them may be asymptomatic unless you're testing every student every day, and that's not going to happen.
Right. No, there's just people who are symptomatic or have had a test for whatever reason, but those students still have to walk through the hallways and go around and do all the other things, and And I think from like a public health perspective or like an infection control perspective, I get this, right? The same reason that we, quarantine highly infectious patients in certain wings or hallways of a hospital to limit the potential exposure around. However, these are children. You need faculty.
This is not a hospital. This is a high
not a
school.
hospital.
Right.
Also, like, just let's say you do it, right? Imagine you've got a classroom or even a hallway, and all of those classrooms are full of kids that have COVID. At the end of the day, they all leave. Like, so are you having them come and go from an outside door, perhaps at the end of the hallway? But then what about all the teachers, all the aides, the janitors? Picture yourself walking down near that hallway and like the sense of like, I guarantee everyone would be like, the air feels heavy with the virus, right? Like you would just have this sense, and it is unnecessary risk, I guess is the thing, right?
Or those kids who have COVID, what if they have to ride the bus to go to school and go home?
Right.
And then they decide, the kids are being kids and they take their mask off or they're not wearing it properly. I mean, it's still raising risk of kids who may have to go back to their grandma and grandpa because they're cared for by somebody who has an underlying condition, and raises the risk of them bringing home COVID to a family member who could then be endangered. And so it's really scary that we're prioritizing this principle of like getting back to normal more than what are the precautions that we need to take to keep everyone safe and slow the spread.
Yeah. And I guess it's an unwillingness to make difficult calls on what we're going to prioritize, right? And like to Scott's point, if you are, I have several friends who, own restaurants, and like they're having to make heartbreaking decisions, right? Tower Theater, decided to close for the rest of the year, basically. Like, and we had, had events planned and tickets sold, and they're, struggling. Like tons of places are having to make very difficult decisions. And there's a space for a policy solution to these, right? But instead, they're arguing about who knows what, and instead of trying to provide relief to people who need it, right? So it's
this whole focus on prayer and fasting and thoughts and not anything tangible related to actionable policy decisions, right? And so it is really frustrating that we're electing leaders who are not choosing to make decisions, but rather share platitudes with the public. And
because if the governor had said, I'm declaring tomorrow a day of statewide prayer and fasting, and I'm also issuing a statewide mask mandate, like then people understand, like, it's not one or the other. But when you leave out the science proven one and you just do the other one, I'm like, well, you invited negative press. You didn't have to. And maybe he would have gotten some, but notably less, negative press, if he had done them both. So I don't envy any of these leaders, to be clear. They're in terrible, I've spoken to several mayors and other statewide elected officials in the last few weeks, many of whom have reached out with thoughts and prayers and, about my family as well. And I appreciate that. And we've had honest conversations of like, this sucks. Like there are no good decisions.
Yeah.
Everybody wants kids back in school. Everybody wants businesses to open. But like,
I want to go see my grandma. I want to do that again.
Yeah. Like, and there's things you just can't, do. Like, I want to talk to my mom, but I can't because she's unconscious. Right. Like, and so, yeah, it's just sucks. It does suck. Scott's right. We're trying to have a policy discussion here, and we all have heavy hearts. Listeners, you probably didn't bargain to just.
This is the consequence of not making policy choices, right?
Yeah.
Like there are real like experiences that harm people. Like this is like the after effect of the things that we've been talking about over, the past several months. And it's wild that like I mentioned in the beginning, that we went from talking about what other people have seen or what was happening in the news to now being able to talk from personal experience on them.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
having to explain to my kids what a ventilator is and why, in fact, my two older kids, from a previous marriage, and their mom, I had let her know, and she told the kids about it and kind of explained. And so I was talking to him the other night, and my son, who's 8, says, yeah, he said, is BB still on the ventilator? I was like, well, not right. She wasn't at the time. Now she is. And he's like, yeah, mom said it's hard to get off of them because your body gets used to using the breathe. And I was like, that's exactly right, son. Like, and it's a weird reality to have your 6 and 8-year-old be able to explain the risks and benefits of a ventilator, right? That was not on the bingo card for this year, as they say. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and my preferred coping mechanism is intellectualization and just pulling back into my brain and out of my heart. And so there's something important happening next week that I can intellectualize and talk about for a few minutes. And that is the fact that, and it relates to all of this, that the state legislature will begin hosting their redistricting town hall meetings next week. There are going to be, they've scheduled 18 town hall meetings around the state over the next 2 months, some in December, a bunch in January. There are 2 in Oklahoma City. There will both be at the state capitol. There will be 2 in the Tulsa area. And then the other 14 are in rural areas. So Ardmore, Lawton, Chickasha, Ada, Enid, Pryor, Lane, there's kind of all of those, the 2 major metros, the next biggest cities, and then a couple of smaller towns. Some of these are hosted by the House. Some are hosted by the Senate. They've tried to sprinkle them around.
And there's virtual options.
And there are virtual options. From what I heard from the House redistricting office, I called to ask all this. Very helpful staff, great people over there. And many of the House staff are like nonpartisan staffers who are just doing this. So the House, for their events at least, they will be streaming it on the House website, okhouse.gov, which is, they're using the same software like interface that they use to stream committee rooms and floor, all that stuff. So it'll be archived and everything else, which is good. The downside, of course, is that it's a one-way virtual option. It's a view only. You can watch it and see what they have to say, but there's not a way in real time to ask questions or get feedback to them. If you want to ask questions or get feedback, you have 2 options. You can submit it to your own House or Senate representative or senator, or at least the House has like a House redistricting office website set up, and you can submit it. There's a form there, and there's a email address that's like House redistricting 2020 something. I forget exactly, but if you Google Oklahoma House redistricting office, you'll find it. They do have a ton of information on there. They've got the last 20 or 30 years of maps, a pretty good overview of the process. I think the House is following up on their promises to try to make this open and transparent. We haven't gotten to the actual drawing of the maps yet, so we'll wait and see what the outcome is. But so far, I've been relieved. I do wish, pursuant to our conversation, that they would make the decision to postpone these meetings. We definitely need to have them. But like, if we are looking at a vaccine rollout beginning next week and continuing, for the next several months, there is no reason that they couldn't cancel the meetings like this month and just reschedule them for later. It's going to be a busy year. Like, we know that. And I get that, finding spaces and all this stuff is going to be difficult. But in the interest of if you really want public input and you really want to keep the public safe, the right thing to do is to postpone the meetings. It's like, we've all postponed events for that reason. Like, that's what you got to do. I will put on my hat of people, not politicians. We want to help you be involved. We want to help explain the process. We want to direct you to the legislature's resources, as well as resources that we have at our disposal. So we're going to be hosting a series of webinars in December and January that are about the redistricting process. They are about how to participate in public meetings. In fact, I'm doing a brief version, but I would encourage you. The League of Women Voters of Seattle, Washington, actually has a thing called Speak Up School, and it's like a multi-module online training about how to participate in public meetings and give public testimony, and it's great. They gave me kind of a preview of it. I'm going to adapt some of that for this, but if you really want an in-depth thing, it's a good free resource. And then we also are going to do a series of trainings about this really cool online tool called Representable. It's representable.org. And it was created by folks at Princeton University, the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. And basically it allows you to go on and draw your community. So your community of interest, right? So your neighborhood or the people that go to your school. And it automatically brings in census blocks. So as you move your cursor around, you can't do it down to the street, but you can do it based on census block. And you can do block groups if you want to zoom out some. And so it's really interesting, one, to see what those census blocks look like, census tracts. And because there's some places you're like, well, why can't I just pick my little neighborhood? And it's like, well, because the census block includes half of the neighborhood next door or whatever. But we are compiling all of that. So everyone who submits, if you go to our People Not Politicians community mapping drive thing, you can draw your map. It gets aggregated in there. It shows everyone who submitted stuff, and we can export all of that as a file that the legislature can drop into their map making software and set it like as a layer, and they can see like visually what the people of Oklahoma identifies their communities, so they can consider that as they draw maps. You can send them a message and tell them, you can say, hey, listen, everyone in this part of town has horses and we all ride on these trails out here, and this is all kind of our territory, even though it's not. It may cross over a city line or a county boundary or something, but it's a really cool tool. So I went on and did a few the other day. The link for that, and I will put this in the show notes. If you just want to go to our community mapping drive, it is representable.org/drive/people-not-politicians. That's a very long website address, and that's why I will put the link in the show notes. So if you're listening, just, scroll down to that and find it.
And Andy, what I love about that is it would be a great compliment to have when you participate in these meetings.
Yeah.
Because you'll be able to see how you would design districts yourself, but also be able to communicate that with the lawmakers and be able to call them out if you're like, I saw that you intentionally moved this way, and I think we need to shape the district this way for X reasons. And so that's such a cool tool that I definitely encourage people to do before they go into the redistricting meetings.
Yeah. Also, another great online tool is Dave's Redistricting. If you Google Dave's Redistricting, you can find it very easily. Dave is a guy, and there's a bunch of other people with him that are volunteers and created this really great portal. And you can go on and move your cursor around, and it goes by census tract. And in real time, you can see all the census data. So it'll show you for each block the racial and ethnic breakdown, the gender breakdown, maybe age, but it has like the partisan affiliation. And so you can see it. You can see the maps are drawn right now, and then you can see this. And they've also drawn maps like a few different ways for our congressional districts and our state Senate districts. They've drawn them as, very compact, like where you prioritize compactness, where you prioritize racial fairness, where you prioritize political fairness, kind of all these things. And it's interesting to see just different ways to draw the maps. And that is also really helpful.
It's a super cool, super useful site. I've played down with it a little bit. I would also remind our listeners that back in the day, in the pre-COVID times, And this was prior to Bailey joining us as our co-host. Though, Andy, you and I did an episode with Dr. Keith Gaddy of the University of Oklahoma, where we talked all things redistricting, and we talked about pack-in and crack-in and compactness and political fairness and communities of interest and all these sorts of things. So I would encourage listeners to dive into the Let's Pod This archive and find that, along with a couple other episodes we did on redistricting, to brush up to snuff.
That's a good reminder.
On all things redistricting.
I can.
So we did four or five pretty deep dives on redistricting and how it works, and what they have to prioritize and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, interesting. I guess if we want to take a holiday break, we could just replay all those episodes. But yeah, they were really good. It was a deep dive into redistricting and how it's done.
Because the good thing is it's outlined how the process is supposed to work and what they're supposed to keep in mind. And so that doesn't change over time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and last night, the League of Women Voters of Oklahoma hosted an online forum with Senator Michael Brooks and Representative A.J. Pittman, who are both respective co-chairs of their chambers redistricting committees. And they kind of went through the basic overview in the slides and talked about the process. And it was, some of the viewers were like, so do you guys think it's a good idea for lawmakers to draw the maps? And they were both like, well, now that I've learned more about it, I don't think so. And I was like sitting there going, thank you. Right. Like once you learn about it, you're like, no, it's crazy that they get to draw their own districts.
Because why wouldn't you think about your own interests?
Right.
Why would you not?
Well, and they also had a representative from the League of Women Voters US, the national organization. And she went over the league's like kind of nationwide criteria for fair maps. They have a whole fair maps initiative. And one of them is that you should not consider where the incumbent lives, right? Because the person who lives in that district today might not even run in that district in 2 years, right? And so it's ridiculous to draw districts that will be in place for 10 years and to consider who happens to be elected from that district right now. And they shortly before that, I guess, when they went through the slides, like that is one of the criteria that the legislature explicitly considers. And so it's like, well, there we go, right? Like at least they admit it of like, yeah, we're gonna draw it and we're gonna consider where we live. It's like, okay, man. So part of my plan with People Not Politicians is to compare the legislature's approach to what we were proposing with our independent commission approach, just so that voters can see like how they're doing it versus how we would do it differently.
Yeah.
Because I think once you see it, you understand that one way is much better than the other. Selfishly.
Not even selfishly,
Agreed.
but for transparency's sake and for the sake of doing it in a nonpartisan way. So
yeah. Well, I smell smoke in my house, and that means either my wife is cooking something or we're going to die in a fire. So we probably should wrap up the episode either way, because I'm interested in both those outcomes.
That's awesome.
well, hopefully it's the first one.
Exactly right.
All
right,
friends. I hope that you have a very safe weekend, and I hope that you get time with your families and time to sit and reflect and just kind of process all the things.
Thanks, man. I plan to eat pizza with my kids and hang out. Watch a holiday movie or two.
Hard to beat that.
Yeah.
Hard to beat that.
Scott Bailey, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Andy.
Listeners, thank you for being here as well. I'm going to stop doing this closeout monologue because no one listens and it's not important. The podcast is done by us for you. We love you. Stay safe. Have a good week.